Hold on, hold on, my dear ones, here comes the dawn. Hold on, my dear ones, here comes the dawn. Hold on, my dear ones, here comes the dawn. Hold on, my dear ones, here comes the dawn. Hold on, my dear ones, here comes the dawn. Hold on, my dear ones, here comes the dawn. Hold on, my dear ones, here comes the dawn. Hold on, my dear ones, here comes the dawn. Hold on, my dear ones, here comes the dawn. Hold on, my dear ones, here comes the dawn. Hold on, my dear ones, here comes the dawn. Hold on, my dear comes the dawn. Hold on, hold on, my dear ones, here comes the dawn. Hold on, hold on, my dear ones, here comes the dawn. Ooh, ooh, hold on, hold on, my dear ones, here comes the dawn. Hold.
Good afternoon. My name is Meenal Haran Kedkar, and I'm the Executive Director for Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake. And on behalf of IPC and our co-host, Interfaith Power and Light, and our 20 grassroots partners, I welcome you to our 2026 legislative briefing for Maryland faith communities. We are so glad to be here with you on this snowy Sunday afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to open with an acknowledgement of the land we are on today. And the land acknowledgement goes as today, we hold space for reflection on and gratitude for the land upon which we live and the local waters that support and nourish us all. We recognize that this land and these waters were beloved by many who came before us. We reflect together as people of faith in response to the calling of our hearts to come alongside the original stewards of this land and these waters that sustain us all. We seek to change the narrative of this story, our story, toward one of harmony with the gifts of creation and all living beings. We ask you to honor and learn from their intimate connection, love, and appreciation of these sacred lands and waters. It is so important that we each bring our stories to this work and speak out rooted in who we are. And with that said, I'd like to offer an opening reflection from my own Hindu tradition. And the reflection goes, faith and prayer both are invisible, but they make impossible things possible. It's important for us in these times of transition that we believe and keep our faith in hearts. Our faith communities can be such a blessing to Maryland's larger environmental movement because we can help make impossible things possible. Each year, this briefing equips us all to raise our voices in Annapolis on behalf of our neighbors and our common home. Next, my colleague Joel will share our agenda and welcome our grassroots partners. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minal. It is so good to be together. I'm Joelle Novi, she, her pronouns with Interfaith Power and Light. And we opened with a song in solidarity with the people of Minnesota with those encouraging words, "My dear ones, here comes the dawn." And Minal shared words of encouragement and hope as well. We are each impacted differently by what is going on in our country and in the world right now, but I know so many of us are carrying a lot on our hearts this afternoon, and I am too. I think we can just take down the share for now. A lot of us are carrying a lot on our hearts this afternoon, and I am too. And I just want to say none of us are alone with the heaviness of this time, with the fears and uncertainty and rage and sorrow that it brings. I don't know how the dawn comes. I don't know how things get better, but I do know it's only by gathering together that we can hear that song of encouragement and sing it with and for each other. So thank you to each of you for doing that for me. In that spirit, I want to take a moment to shout out 20, and you saw those logos displayed as you were coming in, 20 different grassroots groups that are co-sponsoring our call today. Alphabetically, they go from Adama to Unitarian Universalist Legislative Ministry of Maryland. I want to just take 1 minute. If you are here with one of those groups that you are proud of and you want to fly that flag, go for it. Put it in the chat. Share what group brought you here today, or how you're connected to this extraordinary movement we're building in Maryland. So over the next hour and a half, we will do a few things, and in the following order. Today, we just did that. We will hear a conversation from 4 Maryland advocates calling us to faithful action. We will learn about key pieces of environmental legislation that our faith communities can support in the Maryland legislature this session. And finally, we'll have a chance to engage more deeply around one of those bills in a We will be sharing a lot of detail that we will be linking in the chat momentarily, if not already. It is, you'll see it's a bit.ly/speakoutmd26. You will find most of the details we mentioned today, including speaker contact information and other links to fact sheets and resources, right there in that notes document. So just double click that link right now in the chat to pop it open. And I guarantee that you do not need to hustle to write things down that people are saying today, because we are recording this, and that notes document has lots and lots of details and follow-up information, and we will continue to update it all session long. And with that, we will begin our panel and bring up our moderator, the Reverend Catherine Manhart, who I hope is here.
Hi, I am here. I am the Reverend Catherine Manhart. I serve as the Associate Rector at St. James Episcopal Church in Potomac, where I support the ministry of our wonderful Care for Creation team. I've also worked with Action in Montgomery and Interfaith Power and Light over the past few years to document and address the pollution that is caused by gas burning stoves in our community. It is my distinct pleasure to open our program today with a conversation about the why. Why so many of us are called not only to go green in our homes and in our congregations, but also to speak out for stronger environmental policy here in Maryland. I'm going to be in conversation with 3 very good souls who I am also excited to hear from and get to know a little bit better. I'll be speaking with Jose Coronado Flores, who is now a renewable energy professional with Flores Photovoltaics. I tried to pronounce that correctly. I knew I messed it up. And Jose has also previously advocated for environmental justice for Maryland's immigrant communities with CASA. We also have Kea Chatterjee of Free DC, and who is previously the director of the U.S. Climate Action Network, and Jamie DeMarco of DeMarco Advocacy. He represents the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, is the host of the Maryland Energy Talk podcast, and a member of Adelphi Friends meeting. We are here today to reflect on how each of us are called by our values and our traditions to raise our voices in the Maryland legislative session. And so I'd like to open by asking each of you, what is one way that your roots, all of your roots, coming up in Maryland, your family story and culture, or your own faith tradition and values, what is one way that your roots are present for you and guiding you in the work that you are doing now? And I will ask Jose to kick us off.
Thanks, Reverend, and good afternoon, everyone. Seriously, very happy to be here, honored to be here. But to answer your question, the things that define my roots definitely feel like my original country, Guatemala, but also the neighborhoods and places that I've lived here in the United States. I came to the US when I was 4, and I'm 28 now, so I'm really from here. But when I say my neighborhoods, those roots are the places that formed me, and they inform my work because I think about I'm pretty obsessed with improving all the places that I once grew up in. Those roots push me to think about all the things that maybe I have now, or the better air quality in my communities now, or the better housing conditions in where places where I live now compared to where my roots are. I also think a lot about trying to be a compassionate and loving leader. My family, we're like Guatemalan Seventh Day Adventists. A lot of Central Americans are practicing Seventh Day Adventists as like their denomination. And I remember just always hearing about love and being extremely compassionate to other people. But that just grounds me and in like the idea that even though maybe I live better in better conditions now, I will never forget about and stop being a leader for the people who might not be who are in the places where I used to be. So that's how my roots really shape the work that I do as proliferating renewable energy and trying to clean up homes and improve where people live.
Thanks, Jose. I think love and compassion are great values to be holding on to right now. I turn it over to Kaya.
Yeah, hi everyone. Kaya Chatterjee here, she, her pronouns with Free DC. My family is from West Bengal in India, and I was born in California, but I moved to Montgomery County when I was probably two. And I've lived in DC for like the last 30 years, but I did grow up in Montgomery County, and I grew up, celebrating lots of like Hindu ceremonies at Montgomery County public high schools, like Blair High School, on the weekends, because that's where we went to celebrate all the fierce goddesses that are particularly revered by Bengalis, like Durga and Kali and others. And I would say that, for me, a big part of my roots is definitely just knowing that, as recently as my grandparents, they were in a huge struggle for independence, up against, the British Navy and the British Army. And they were, it was all encompassing in many ways, and they made it. And we have those lessons, and we have those ancestors, and we stand on those shoulders. And so much of that, was really, I would say, like, supported and cultivated and felt very welcomed in my growing up in Montgomery County too. And it's a part of, I think, why, yeah, I was able to hold on to those roots, that I grew up in a place that was so welcoming and open to a whole lot of cultures.
Thank you, Kaya. I love the idea of holding on to the stories of our ancestors to guide us in this particular moment. I think it's really powerful. Jamie, how about you?
Yes, Jamie DeMarco, he, him, representing the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. And I first just want to say that Jose and Kaya are two of my favorite people in the world. And so I'm very tickled to be on a panel with both of them. I feel very lucky and fortunate to be raised in a household of advocacy. Both my parents were advocates in the public health space, and I think I grew up, it felt sort of presumed that the question was like, what are you going to do to make the world a better place? And it wasn't really until I was an adult where it sort of dawned on me that not everyone is guided by that question. And so I feel very formed by both of my parents, as well as my grandparents. My grandparents on my dad's side were born and raised and lived most of their life in a small town in southern Italy, where their ancestors had lived for some 1,000+ years, and they left there to come to the United States to try to make a better life for their family. My grandfather on my mom's side got a Purple Heart at D-Day fighting fascism. And my grandmother on my mom's side, raised 11 kids, was a widow, and still managed to raise that family and raise a great mom who raised me. And so I also feel like I'm carrying lots of my ancestors who did things much harder than I ever face in my day, and that is always a source of strength. And I also think that my Quaker faith has been very important to me, and adds another layer of like, yeah, you're here to fight for a better world, so what is it going to look like? And that, I think, both is my Quaker faith is part of what has created that question in my mind every day, and part of the community and spiritual practice that has helped me to stay on that path even when it feels really hard.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you all for sharing about, the ways the grounding in our faith traditions, our family stories, can help us to be prepared to act in this present moment where we know that the world needs it so much. Thank you. Speaking of this moment, we know that right now our country and so many of our communities are in crisis. Though we are each differently situated in how the horrors of the present moment are impacting us. There are many ways we are being called to act in response in each of our congregations. We're meeting immediate needs through mutual aid. We're helping families harmed or terrorized by ICE. We're supporting loved ones through job loss and uncertainty, and protesting in DC or at the national level. It's a lot. So to our panelists, in this particular moment, January 2026, what do you each see as the value of engaging at the state level here in Maryland in advocacy for environmental justice, for clean water and clean energy policy? Feel free to kick it off again, Jose.
Yeah, of course. Happy to jump in. I really like this question, and I like that. I guess it's framed around the moment right now with immigration enforcement. I want to say that I don't want anyone to forget that climate policy and, let's say, improving the lives of the immigrant communities and disadvantaged communities are one and the same. And I'll talk a little bit about why focusing on Maryland and our state level advocacy is so powerful as we try to defend against the federal government. But the communities that are being raided, what do you see there? They're very close to polluting facilities. I used to work really extensively on this issue. The housing is really bad. And when we talk about electrifying homes or electrifying buildings or promoting solar energy everywhere, that really translates to burning less at a power plant nearby immigrant community that's also being raided right now. It also electrifying buildings means that those homes where honestly immigrant families are trapped right now, too scared to go outside, they're healthier. When they're cooking all day long at staying at home, it's with clean appliances. When we're heating our homes, it's with clean appliances. What I'm trying to say is that in CASA, my work at CASA really oriented me. Everything is holistic. We have to look at it the whole picture. So we keep fighting. We make sure that we're not going back on climate goals, that we're still prioritizing communities that are most disadvantaged. And we can do that at the state level, directing funding, at telling legislators, hey, don't forget about this topic. We know there's a lot of other things going on right now, but this is just as important. And yeah, I'll also say that our state legislature is a lot friendlier than the federal government right now. And I don't want us to forget that. Even though we're still going to advocate to have really strong provisions in whatever policy we're pushing forth, we're mostly with friends, and that means a lot. And they want to hear from you. They want to hear from you to know that you want strong provisions on whatever policy that you are watching, and you want them to keep acting. So yeah, those are the ways that I think there's a lot of value right now at the state level for all policy.
That's great. Thank you, Jose. Kaya, want to jump in?
Yeah, so I run for DC right now, and I'm calling in from the 6th month of federal occupation of DC. And I want to be very just blunt that they are trying to take over the capital of this country in order to suppress dissent and prevent a transfer of power. And that they will very likely make an attempt to dissolve DC government. And if that happens, we will try very hard to be a forceful presence in the streets to prevent that happening. But if that happens, then we will need to, frankly, just have an alternative election and elect a governor. and just keep a sense of defiance going. And if we get to that stage, we will need other governors to recognize the governor of Douglas Commonwealth, like the governor of Maryland, like the governor of Virginia. And it's going to really matter how far we've been able to advance our interests in these places so that people feel bold and feel momentum and feel like we are not only responding to the horrors of the murders and the kidnappings by the state, but also ultimately, what are we fighting? I mean, we named ourselves Free DC because ultimately we're fighting for liberation, right? It's not just that we want the killing to stop or the kidnappings to stop. We actually want, everyone to have a home, a healthy home, everyone to be able to breathe, everyone to have water, everyone to have food. And it is a very small group of wealthy individuals and their greed that has got us to a place where instead we're having people murdered on the streets by the state and kidnapped off the streets by the state. And like in DC last week, there was literally, people pointing long rifles into people's cars, or FBI agents throwing sound bombs in residential neighborhoods. And this is like small. And we got here again. The root cause is so important for us to understand why this advocacy is so important. The root cause is that a bunch of billionaires want stuff for themselves at the expense of anyone and at the expense of our entire planet. There's a reason they went so hard after the Inflation Reduction Act. There's a reason they went so hard after, they call it the Green New Scam. It's actually the top line of their memos. They hate Marxism, the Green New Scam, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? They're going after that stuff hard because they want to make money off of polluting. The more we actually pass legislation at the state level that takes away their ability to do that, we actually are fighting them. And so I'm not saying to like we don't like there's so much on all of our plates. I certainly encourage everyone to come to a Free DC orientation, get trained up and through our non-cooperation trainings, understand how fascism works and how we fight it. But what I can tell you is that one part of it for sure is making sure that the Maryland state government is taking every single action available to them to take money out of the hands of polluters and to protect our home, right? Our planet.
I'm into that. Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah, I love working in Maryland because Maryland leaders can do the right thing, but it's not guaranteed that they will. And the actions of individuals like the people on this call can make the difference. State level advocacy is just so different from national advocacy or congressional advocacy in that like a very relatively small mobilization of people in key areas can actually swing lawmakers and make the difference. Last year we tried to repeal 287G in Maryland, which for folks who don't know, 287G is statute that allows ICE to deputize other law enforcement agencies to enact immigration enforcement and kidnap people. But we're trying to repeal that authority in Maryland. Last year, it did not go forward, the repeal of 287G. This year, it looks like it is because the Senate President Bill Ferguson has flipped, and he's flipped because of advocacy in his district, and he's maybe afraid of a primary challenger. So we can change the outcomes of the legislature, which Kaya said matters a lot, particularly here in the Capital Region. And we can change it on energy policy. And I know sometimes I ask myself, like, what are we doing working on energy? I think earlier this week, I was like writing a memo on how we should reform solar incentives in Maryland, while also like taking breaks and checking social media and seeing the images of the 5-year-old kidnapped in Minnesota and used as bait for his parents and thinking like, what the hell are we doing? Like, why? Yeah. As Kaya said, it's never been clearer the ties between the fossil fuel industry and fascism and the alliance between the fossil fuel industry and this Trump administration. And while we can't break that alliance, what we can do is turn the fossil fuels that they control into worthless sludge that they can't sell by destroying the market. one policy at a time, and where we can control that is at the state level.
Thank you all. I do think it's so important to just highlight how interconnected all of these issues are and how, building a world where we all can flourish depends on acting in so many different spaces that are connected all at the same time. And I think one of the things I use with my parishioners right now is the phrase from the organizer Adrienne Marie Brown, where she says small is all, and how the things that we do on a small level in our neighborhoods and our communities and our state is like where we build the skills and the practices and the values and the habits that we need to do the change on the bigger level. So I think acting locally is just so critically important right now. And I guess that takes us to our next question, actually. All of us are here today, not only as caring Maryland residents, but as members of congregations of many faiths. So as we think about getting our congregations involved in the Maryland legislative session, sometimes I know folks from my own faith tradition can be very interested in projects like introducing composting at coffee hour, or planting native pollinator gardens, or planning worship and education programs that focus on creation care. Did a great series about green burials a couple of years ago. But when it comes to advocacy for legislative efforts, we hear that people find engaging in this kind of public action a little scary or uncomfortable. I'm sure many of us on this call have heard somebody say, oh, but that's too political. So my question for our three panelists is, make the case for us. What do each of you see as the unique power of faith communities in Maryland raising their voices in Annapolis?
I'm happy to jump in first. And I'd like to answer with an example. So in my work at Costa, like I mentioned, I did climate environmental advocacy, but it was always in tandem with local immigration policy. And one of the most powerful moments I've ever been like witnessed was in I believe maybe it was uh Ways and Means. There was a discussion on an immigration bill. I think funding for maybe legal representation. And one of the people who came to speak was a pastor, and he took the fire for almost everyone on the panel, all the representatives who had really nasty things to say about the legislation. Um, he was an individual that just responded every time very confidently, referencing scripture, and it impacted the opposing legislators. It helped them. Maybe it didn't change their hearts right there and then, but it gave them a new perspective in a powerful way that, I'll be honest, other advocates, other people on that panel wouldn't have been able to. So there's a lot of power. And in addition to that, these are some of the most well organized places, institutions everywhere, not just in Maryland, not just in DC, but everywhere. When faith communities, when congregations, they can be the place of genesis of new ideas for a whole new community. I think of people, for example, who first heard about getting solar on their homes at their church, or one person in their congregation got a heat pump. And I'm lucky to have been in these spaces to learn how well organized the faith communities are around environmental topics. But those are the ways, like the perspective of faith leaders and just everybody, all participants, it means something to legislators. And I've seen hearts like going the path to transition, like opposition turning into understanding, or opposition turning into like listening. So the perspective and power is actually significant.
Thanks, Jose. Totally agree. I again, I'm just going to be very blunt here. The fascists aren't going to not use religion. They are putting forward a version of, white Christian nationalism, that is driving everything they're doing, and they are not going to refrain from using the moral authority of religion. And so if we hold ourselves back, then they take that space. And I don't think we can let that happen. And faith communities have like particular advantages that I'm just going to run through, right? Like it's the moral protest, it's the moral perspective. It's the ability to organize and train people because you have physical spaces and you have actual people. It's the ability to provide resources, as Jose was just saying, like, where do you get solar? Where do you get a heat pump? Mutual aid we often think of as food, but also all of these things around environment are forms of mutual aid. And potentially, forms of sanctuary around, like, if there's extreme weather, et cetera. Leveraging symbolic and spiritual power and ritual in our places of legislation is extremely powerful, right? This is an extremely powerful, like, superpower that faith leaders have. Bridge building, trying to bring together, like unions, grassroots groups, business, like that is a really important role that it's hard for others to play. That's a superpower of the faith community. And finally, non-cooperation, that willingness to go in and say, you know what, we're here because we need this to happen, and we won't leave until we get it. That is something that there's a powerful tradition of in faith communities. And so let's not leave those superpowers on the table. Take them to the Maryland legislature.
Yes, let's. I really have seen that faith advocacy can shape outcomes and determine the difference between success and failure. One really concrete and significant example is around the fracking ban in Maryland, where Maryland for years was trying to ban fracking. We moved a bill, it got amended down to a 2-year moratorium. And then 2 years later, we were working to pass a fracking ban. If we didn't pass it that session, the moratorium was going to go out of effect. And then we'd see fracking wells in Maryland. And once, rigs are up, it's much harder to ban because you're not talking about hypothetical jobs, there's real jobs. So it was really the last session we could to ban fracking. And we were in the final week of that session, and Democrats had not yet committed to moving the fracking ban, and it didn't look like they were going to. And a group of faith community leaders got arrested outside of the state capitol in Annapolis, and it was on the news. And there were all these headlines of the faith community calls for a fracking ban in Maryland. And 2 days later, Republican Governor Larry Hogan endorsed a fracking ban in Maryland. The Republican governor actually flanked the Democrats from the left and came out in support of a fracking ban. And shortly after he did that, the Democrats said they were going to pass the fracking ban. And Maryland remains, I think, the only state with meaningful gas reserves to ban fracking through legislation. And it wouldn't have happened without that action from lawmakers. And that doesn't mean everyone has to get arrested. Getting arrested is not for everyone. But it speaks to what both Jose and Kay have talked about, is how the faith community has a moral clarity and social license that, when brought to bear, can move lawmakers when nothing else can.
Thank you all. I hope everybody heard the significant power that is present in all of our communities. And now is a time to use it if ever there was one. And I think we actually have time to do our last question quickly. It's one that I would really like to hear from all of you on, so I'm just going to go ahead with it. And it's a question about hope. And that's the note that I want to end our conversation on. Drawing from my own religious tradition, I've been thinking about a passage from the Apostle Paul's letter to the Romans, where Paul says, I'm paraphrasing, that even in times of great trial, our faith gives us a hope that does not disappoint. And as people of faith, I truly believe that our superpower is the ability to embody persistent hope in the midst of whatever the world throws at us. And so in the spirit of finding that hope, I would like to invite each of our panelists to share one moment, one favorite memory from the last few months that is keeping you going and reminds you what you're fighting for and why it's worth it.
Oh, I got you. I'm happy to go first again. I want to just share with all of you that I get to go and have transformative conversations in my day-to-day by selling solar. Usually when people think about selling solar, it's like a super aggressive and like sign now process, but that's the opposite of what I try to do with my solar company. And last month I found a client. She and I, African American woman from Baltimore, she and I spent 3 hours talking about everything except solar. We talked about Latino Black race relations. We talked about global politics. And at the end of it, all I knew is that there was a woman in Baltimore on a block with no solar, ready to make the transition because she's getting ready for a world that's chaotic. She doesn't want to give all her money to these polluting companies or utilities. And she's there. She's there in, like I'm telling you, a place where no one is thinking about it. But she is. These people are out there. And and it was a great conversation and a great moment. And that's what I wanted to share.
Thanks, Jose. I'm struggling to think of one that's quite as like on topic as yours, Jose. So I'm just gonna have to go a little off topic because there's so many other ones. But I would say there was a moment right after the occupation of DC began when the Spirits, the women's soccer team in DC, was playing the day after the occupation began. And at the 51st minute, to mark the 51st state, the whole stadium started chanting Free DC so loud that the commentators had to stop talking. And it was really just this moment of feeling not alone and the scale. And then when the team was traveling, people started chanting it, like other cities' fans started chanting it at the 51st minute. And it was just such a beautiful show of solidarity around the country. And with masses of numbers of people that make it clear, like these are tens of thousands of people in stadiums that just remind us we are so, so not alone. There are so many people with us.
I find whenever I go to a place in person with other people physically, it makes me feel better. Like maybe it helps the movement, but it makes me feel better. I went in a way that like resharing a post just doesn't. It's definitely a necessary fuel that I could not keep going without. And the other thing that I just love is whenever Trump loses. Like every time, like whether it's on, Kilmar Abrego Garcia is still in the United States, even when Jimmy Kimmel came back, all these offshore wind court cases Trump has been losing, they just thrive off of everyone feeling like they are unstoppable and they have absolute power. And whenever they lose, it's a nice reminder of like, we can beat these guys. Like we can come out of this on the other side. They are not all powerful and we have a lot of power.
Thank you all. I am so grateful for this conversation and for being a part of a larger grassroots movement for environmental justice in Maryland that includes all of you, for all of your stories of hope, all of your challenges to us. Thank you for being here with this group today. What is giving me hope is all of you, you three specifically, but then also everybody who's gathered together on this call, all the people in all the congregations around our state. We're trying our best to put our next faithful footstep forward during this time. So thank you to our panelists and thank you to all of you. And with that, I will hand it over to Anna from IPC to facilitate the rest of our program.
Hi, yeah, so thank you so much, Reverend Catherine and Jamie and Kea and Jose. This has been just a really I just want to add to that feeling of how great it is when you get together and there's so many people together working together and supporting you. We just actually last week, Minal and I were on the Hill with a couple of other folks, and again, just the energy that we got from just meeting with legislators and telling them about our work. It's really empowering. So I hope all of you will take a moment at some point during this next 90 days. It's a little less than 90 now, to just go and visit your local legislators and talk to them about what you're passionate about. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Anna Wimbo. I am the Director of Leadership Development, and also I support a lot of the advocacy work here at Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake. And so, Joelle and I and others on the IPL and IPC team work really closely together on determining what our priorities should be each session. And so we polled, a lot of our advocates in our networks, and we've landed on these 4 priority pieces of legislation that we're going to be focusing on this afternoon. And so the 4 are the Maryland Bottle Bill, the CHERISH Act, data center legislation, and then the Affordable Solar Act. And so each of the speakers on each of those pieces of legislation are going to, start off with a 5-minute kind of high-level overview of their bills. And then we'll open up into 4 separate breakout rooms, and each of you in the audience can pick whichever piece of legislation you really would like to take a deeper dive into. And then we'll break out for about 15 minutes or so, just answer more in-depth questions, and then we'll all come back together for a closing. So the first speaker is going to be Martha Ainsworth, who's been leading the Maryland Bottle Bill Coalition. And I'll just hand it over to you, Martha, to take us away and just kind of give us a high-level view of the momentum that's building around the bottle bill.
Well, thank you very much. And thanks also to the previous speakers who've definitely lifted my spirits today. I'm Martha Ainsworth. I'm the chair of the Maryland Sierra Club Zero Waste team. I'm going to tell you about the momentum of the bottle bill. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, thank you. So the objective of the Maryland Bottle Bill, which is actually formally called the Beverage Container Recycling Refund and Litter Reduction Program, now has bill numbers there on the slide, is to reduce beverage container litter and plastic pollution. More than 5.5 billion beverage containers actually are sold in Maryland every year, but only about a quarter are captured for recycling, and more than 4 billion are left in the environment or incinerated, and 2.6 billion of those are plastic beverage containers. So in the environment, the littered plastic beverage containers break down into small plastic particles, microplastics, and nanoplastics, where they're ingested by wildlife and move up the food chain to people. All of these containers that are wasted could have been made into new containers, reducing the need for extraction of virgin materials and the greenhouse gas emissions they all produce in that process. So how does it work? How does the program work? Next slide. A small refundable deposits placed on the sale of glass, plastic, and metal beverage containers, either 10 or 15 cents, depending on the container size. Deposits refunded when the containers are returned to a convenient retailer or redemption facility for recycling. We have on the right two of the technologies used now, the reverse vending machine and the clink bag drop. You should think about this as buying the beverage but borrowing the container, because they really want the containers back. We don't want them wasted in the environment. The program is implemented and financed by beverage producers through a nonprofit stewardship organization with strong oversight from the Maryland Department of Environment, and it has an enforceable target of 90% recovery rate. The program is budget neutral to the state. I should mention that deposit programs are really the gold standard for preventing litter. When you assign a value to a used container, fewer people litter or discard it in the trash, and others who find them on the roadside collect them for the refund. So these programs have been going on in the US for decades and spreading across the globe as a major intervention to prevent plastic pollution. The Maryland Bottle Bill has benefited from the lessons of all of this experience the last 50 years. So what benefits do we expect? Next slide. The bottle bill will divert 3.6 additional beverage containers from the environment annually, 2.3 billion of which are plastic. That correlates with the 90% redemption rate. Because the beverage containers are kept separate from other recycling, bottle bills produce high-quality food-grade materials for closed-loop recycling or reuse. Local governments will realize cost savings from less municipal solid waste as people stop trashing used containers and redeem them for the refund. And new jobs will be created. The program has a grant fund that allows grants for investments in reuse systems, and that this year will be And this year's bill will be managed by the Chesapeake Bay Trust. Last year it was by the Maryland Department of Environment, so we moved over to Chesapeake Bay Trust. Next slide, please. So the bottle bill campaign gained major momentum in 2025. And you see some of the champions of that in the picture. Some of them you will recognize. A statewide opinion poll found that 90% of registered voters support a Maryland bottle bill with a 10-cent refundable deposit, and that's financed by beverage producers, not by taxpayers. Two amendments were added that helped it along. One clarified that local governments are not responsible for financing or operating redemption centers. And second, the program now offers recyclers reimbursement for the collection, transport, sorting, and processing of any redeemable containers that they get in the recycling bin. The bill passed the House Environment and Transportation Committee for the first time in at least a decade, maybe longer, by a vote to 17-6. It stopped there. The secondary committee, Economic Matters, just declined to vote for it. I should mention that the leadership of that committee has been replaced for the next session. And there was a hearing also in the Senate Education, Energy, and Environment Committee. So next slide. Let me just say that the first attempts to pass the bottle bill in Maryland were in the 1970s. That's right. The bottle bill is the closest it's ever been to being passed. So it's been heavily influenced by concern about the impact of microplastics on human health revealed in the last year. So here are some things that you can do to get us to the finish line, but this has really got to be the year of the bottle bill. You can send a photo of beverage container litter to your elected officials and tell them you really want the bottle bill. You can get your city and county councils to endorse the bill. The action alert on the right side would go to all of your elected state level officials. And we have these hearing dates now. They're just announced in the last couple days. Then they're early, February 10th and February 11th, almost back to back in the Senate and the House. So we're really pushing it still will have to go through the Economic Matters Committee, and we're working hard to lobby them as well. They sit in on the Environment and Transportation Committee hearing. So you could go ahead and submit testimony, and I'm sure that Anna will probably circulate the instructions for how to do that. The bottom line, next slide, we have a major litter and plastic pollution problem, a growing public health problem due to microplastics. There's a highly effective solution that makes the beverage companies responsible for fixing the problem. Program's budget neutral. It reduces the cost for local governments. It doesn't rely on the federal government at all. And it has overwhelming public support. So why are we waiting to pass this bill? This is the year of the bottle bill. Earn cash for trash and lose the litter. Every year we put this off, another 4 billion containers enter the environment. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Martha. So we'll definitely be watching this bill closely. And yeah, we've heard from some of the legislators that it's really a no-brainer, and they don't understand why it's hasn't been passed sooner. So next up is Jennifer Coons with Clean Water Action. And Jennifer is going to be talking about the Cherish Our Communities Act. So welcome, Jennifer, and I will just spotlight you.
Yes, thank you so much, and thanks everybody for being here. I'm really happy to be with you today. Hope everybody is staying safe, and I'm also really happy to be supporting the Cherish Our Communities Act. And this is important environmental justice legislation to right the wrongs of communities being made into sacrifice zones, taking on the pollution of heavy industry and polluters in our society. And so bills, folks may be familiar with the basic concept of the Cherish Our Communities Act, which is dealing with cumulative impacts. And cumulative impacts is a recognition of the fact that, A, when we breathe in air from the air around us, or when we drink water from a well or from a nearby stream or river, if that water or air is polluted, we're not just dealing with one pollutant at a time, pollution from one facility at a time or source at a time. Our bodies are taking in everything in the air and water around us. And if there's multiple pollutants, that's compounding and making worse damage on our bodies. And so that cumulative impact means that sacrifice zones dealing with multiple sources of pollution people see much, much worse health impacts because of all of that cumulative compounding harm from pollution. But Maryland's system of issuing permits to pollute, the legal structure that is set up by the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, and other laws, does not recognize that scientific fact. It does not currently recognize the cumulative impacts of pollution on our bodies. It just has the regulator, so the Maryland Department of the Environment, or in some cases another state agency, look at this one individual permit application, this one individual facility, as though it were all by itself, as though it were in a pocket universe, and say, okay, is the pollution from this facility below a certain threshold? Is it following these steps? Check it off, and the permit can be issued. And right now, there's never any consideration, meaningful consideration of what does issuing this permit mean in real terms for the people who are living near that proposed facility, especially if there are also 100 other proposed facilities at that location. For example, this picture right here is a photograph of South Baltimore, the neighborhood of Curtis Bay, where on the right of the picture you have residential homes, you have the neighborhood, you have the community center, you have a community garden. And just a couple of blocks off frame, you have the neighborhood high school. Whereas on the left of the picture, you see the coal export terminal that CSX operates just a couple dozen yards away from people's homes, blowing dust onto people's homes. Further into the background, you can see the coal plant in Anne Arundel County. Further into the background to the right, you can see fossil fuel storage tanks. And there are almost 100 permits to pollute within a mile of the neighborhood of Curtis Bay in South Baltimore. And so in a lot of ways, South Baltimore, Curtis Bay has been made a sacrifice zone, taking on a disproportionate amount of this pollution. And there are sacrifice zones across the state that, because of classism and racism in the past and today, are more often low-income communities and communities of color. So that's the problem we're trying to solve with the CHERISH Act, to fix Maryland's permitting system, to take into account the real impacts of pollution on people's health, and move from environmental injustice to a system that will be better at protecting people's health in overburdened communities. Next slide. So how did we get to the CHERISH Act, and how does it work? So the CHERISH Act was developed over the past couple of years, led by frontline community groups, especially in South Baltimore, but also in other parts of the state, and informed by bills that have already passed and gone into effect in several other states: New Jersey, Minnesota, hearts out to Minnesota, and New York State. And so this bill takes the best practices from each of those other bills and adapts them into Maryland's framework. And so what it does, it defines a geographic area based on pollution and health metrics. And it defines a list of permits based on what frontline communities are voicing are the types of permits and facilities that have the most direct impact on their health. And it says if a company is applying for one of those permits in one of those geographic areas, there are some extra steps and extra considerations. The permit applicant, who's a company that's applying for the permit to pollute, has to include a burden report along with their permit application asking for permission to pollute in the community. The burden report stands for a baseline understanding of, oh gosh, It lays out, it's a very clever acronym that I didn't come up with, and it lays out it's meant to lay out what is the existing level of pollution in the community and what would issuing this permit add to it, or if it's a permit renewing on a cycle for a facility that already exists, what does this facility at its current level pollution contribute to the pollution in the community? And then, we don't necessarily think that the permit applicant is going to include every little relevant detail themselves in that report. So then the state is tasked with taking public comment on the burden report so that community members, scientists working with the community, advocacy groups like all of us here can also make sure there aren't any gaps in that burden report. And that's actually a really critical, important step. One of the injustices that we're trying to fix with this bill is that the state doesn't currently take public comment on many important air permits with big impacts on the community, and also many important refuse disposal permits, such as for landfills and so on. So we're making sure that the community has a chance to have its voice heard on those really critical permits with a big impact on people's health. And so once that report is submitted, once the state agencies take public comment, they're tasked with making a decision. Is the conclusion of the state that issuing this permit in the case of a new facility would increase a disproportionate pollution burden on the community? In the case of a new existing facility, is it contributing to a disproportionate burden on the community? And if the answer to that is yes, a new facility cannot be built. If it's going to add to disproportionate harm on an overburdened environmental justice community, it cannot be built. If it's a renewal of an existing facility, MDE gains the ability to deny it based on that basis. If they don't deny it, if they do issue the permit, they have to include new conditions to reduce pollution on that community. And then finally, the final step is what happens when a permit gets violated, which does happen frequently. And so the CHERISH Act says that if there's a violation of the permit, if the facility is polluting more than even it's allowed to, higher penalties, they have to pay the state more, and they have to provide benefit to the community directly as well. So that's the framework. Those are the tools that this bill will give frontline communities in Maryland to fight back against polluters, make sure pollution can't get worse, and gradually reduce the amount of pollution that we're dealing with. Next slide. And so the final step we've done is, where are we now and what do we need to do to get this bill passed? The coalition has done, and I should mention this bill was developed by the Mid-Atlantic Justice Coalition, has done a lot of work to get the bill right for Maryland, get it right for Maryland, both in the law and in the current situation that Maryland is in. We've been meeting in terms of the budget. So we've been meeting with the Maryland Department of the Environment for months now, and they've come on board with we've come to an agreement on what the bill ought to look like. We've been doing a lot of work to convince legislators, but there's a long way still to go because the polluters who want to be able to keep polluting in sacrifice zones don't want this bill to pass and are very loud about it. So we need to be louder. So I hope that you'll join us in getting the CHERISH Act over the finish line, and look forward to talking with some of y'all in the breakout room.
Thanks so much, Jennifer, for all your hard work. So next, we're going to move on to talk about data center legislation. And Andrea is going to take that and give us a high-level 5-minute overview, and then we'll all get a chance to jump into more detail during the breakout. So welcome, Andrea.
Hello, everybody. It's very nice to be here with you today on this very snowy afternoon now, I guess. My name is Andrea Orozco. I work as the Faithful Advocacy Lead at Interfaith Power and Light, DMV. My pronouns are she, her. And I will keep an abbreviated presentation on data centers and look forward to seeing some of y'all in those breakout groups. Can we move on to the first slide? So very quickly, like I know that data centers are in the news all of the time, but just wanted to give a quick overview. Data centers are facilities that house the IT infrastructure for building, running, and delivering application and web services. And they have existed in the past for many decades now in smaller like levels, like at smaller scale. But the use of generative AI like ChatGPT or cloud services has like exponentially like grown the demand for them. And that's why we're seeing these like huge facilities. These facilities run 24/7. They are not, and they are never off. And because of that, they are ravenous for the resources that can help them keep running. That includes water to cool them down. That includes space to like put these giant campuses on. And then the thing that we'll really focus on today is energy. They just require so much energy. Across the country, like we're seeing an unprecedented surge in power demand. This is raising concerns about reliability, is increasing our monthly utility bills. I'm sure folks have noticed that their month to month is going up. And it is also causing like real concern about environmental harms in overburdened and underserved communities. Because they require so much power, we know that like in Montgomery County, they're talking about uh, like repurposing the Dickerson plant to try to build a data center there. And that's just like one example, right? Like we know that wherever there are real concerns here. Can we move to the next slide? Thank you. So what can we do in Annapolis this session? This is not by no means the only piece of legislation, and we can continue our conversation in the data center breakout group. But we are focusing on a piece of legislation introduced that will soon be introduced by Delegate Charkoudian and Senator Fry Hester, that is focused on shifting the demand from these centers during high peak times. If we are doing a super top level overview about what this bill does, you can think of it of like a switch is installed inside of the data center at the time of building. And during the hottest summer days or another time where we have high peak demand, they can flip the switch and push and then use a backup like energy storage. So this is great, just not just because like it will prevent like rolling blackouts or any kind of blackouts during these high peak times, but it also requires that this backup energy be battery storage, whether on the facility or paying for residential battery storage to aggregate demand, or if they have another idea about how they can meet these without putting more emissions into the air, then they are like welcome to. But these are the two proposals. This bill also establishes a community benefit fee, which supports energy assistance and efficiency upgrades for low-income households. And finally, it ensures that the construction jobs that are used to build these data centers, because I can't in good faith tell you that none of them will open. But when they do, it ensures that there are prevailing wages for those construction workers. Can we go to the next slide, please? And finally, so that is just like one piece of this campaign, right? So in addition to what we can do in Annapolis, IPL is also working on a campaign that focuses on what we can do as individuals and members of our congregation. We'll offer best practices for the folks who have joined us for multiple years and are in this fight or have been in this fight with us. You'll notice like I've included past photo petitions. We'll also have a new photo petition for data centers. And we'll offer opportunities to plug into local campaigns so that we can insist that data centers are good neighbors, that are not polluting our communities, that are not causing harm to our neighbors. And we can't totally opt out of artificial intelligence in our lives. Like a lot of our web-based services are unfortunately just reliant on it now, but we can bring real wisdom rooted in our values and faith to this fight. There's something unique about like what we bring as people, and we really can make the difference here at a local level as well as the state level. With that, I will pass it on to the next speaker, or back to Anna, and I will see hopefully some of you in the breakout group for a little bit more of an in-depth conversation about data centers.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. I love those photo petitions. They're really cool in a good way, kind of like a first step to get involved. So finally, we're going to hear from Maddie Smith, who is also with IPL DMV, and she's going to be talking about giving us an overview on the Affordable Solar Act. So welcome, Maddie, and I will spotlight you in a minute.
Hi, everyone. It's really good to be here with you. I'm Maddie Smith. My pronouns are they, them. I'm with Interfaith Power and Light, DMV, as the Clean Energy Shepherd. And what that means is that a lot of my job is helping congregations and folks like you figure out how to do different solar projects, energy efficiency, electrification. And so please feel free to reach out to me if that's something that you're interested in at your congregation. But today, maybe Joelle can put my email in the chat for folks who might be interested in doing some of those projects across your buildings. Today, however, I'm going to be speaking a little bit about a piece of legislation that we're also really excited about called the Affordable Solar Act. And so this bill is being introduced by Delegate Lorig Charkoudian, who's one of the climate champs in the legislature. And this is important because we know that solar energy is the fastest and most cost-effective way to build new electricity generation. And I see this every month when we are working with our houses of worship that want to try to do solar. Being able to do solar saves people a lot of money and helps make our grid even cleaner in this time when these data centers that Andrea talked about are using even more electricity. So why is this important now? So in 2023, Maryland passed the Brighter Tomorrow Act, which was a short-term bridge to try to keep rooftop and community solar moving forward, but with the understanding that they would need to come to a longer-term commitment to incentivize solar in Maryland. And this is, I think, particularly important right now because the federal government is phasing out the tax credits for solar. So for individual solar projects like on your homes, the 30% tax credit is already gone. And we have a little bit of time, roughly 2 years, to try to do as many commercial solar projects as we can that can still benefit from the tax credit. So this is the perfect time for Maryland to be making a commitment to solar to make it even easier for folks to do it in a time when the federal government is sort of abdicating responsibility for incentivizing solar. So what this act would do is it would modernize how Maryland supports solar, and it would update the current incentive system and replace it with a new model called SREC 2. SREC stands for Solar Renewable Energy Credits. And for large utility scale solar, the Public Service Commission will run competitive bids, which would make sure that projects are built at the best value for ratepayers. And when I say utility scale solar, that's like a big solar farm, not just like the solar that you would put on a rooftop of a building. The PSC will also have the power to adjust solar incentives for rooftop and community solar projects, and those would be adjusted based on real market conditions and federal policy. So given that this is a time where solar is less incentivized on the federal level, the Maryland PSC under this law could choose to further incentivize these projects to sort of make up for what's happening on the federal level. And this bill this approach is expected to help create up to 4,000 megawatts of new solar by 2035. And one thing to note about this bill is it doesn't affect what ratepayers are paying for electricity right now. It uses funds that are already collected from the utilities that incentivize solar. And redirects those funds into a more effective, transparent system that helps incentivize solar. I'll say that I'm just personally really excited about this because I'm envisioning a future with this bill that helps incentivize even more solar projects at our houses of worship and projects like those on community businesses, etc. Like we know that distributed solar is really good for the grid. And like this bill is trying to incentivize it as much as we can. One thing I'll note that this bill also does is it opens the door to balcony solar, which is a really cool thing that exists in a lot of places in Europe, which is like a small plug-in solar panel system that you can put on your balcony if you're an apartment renter or condo owner, that you can put that will, you can generate your own electricity and have it go towards your own bills, which is not something that you can really do right now if you're a renter. So this would legalize that, and that's something that folks are really excited about. Yeah, and I think I will leave it there and be excited to chat with folks in the breakout room.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you to all of our presenters. And now we're going to take a moment and take a deeper dive, and I will stop the recording here.
Yep. Welcome back, everybody. And if that felt like you got interrupted in the middle of a really great conversation, don't let it be the end. Please keep going. keep your conversation going. I hope you feel more ready now than you did at the beginning of today's event to raise your voice in support of one of these bills, at least. And as we close out the program, I'm going to call attention one more time to the resource document, which Ethan just pasted again. It's a one-stop shop for information shared today, including some guidance about how to find your legislators, how to reassure everyone in your congregation who wants to double check that it's kosher for your nonprofit organization to do environmental advocacy. Spoiler alert, it's totally kosher. And we will continue to update this document as more information like bill numbers comes along in the yes, we will continue to update the document with additional content. And if you have additional events or resources that you want to share, let us know and we'll add them to that document, especially the faith-specific lobby days. I know some of them get scheduled. It is so good to be with people from so many different communities across Maryland. Please remember that you are the most powerful person in the world to engage your community in the campaigns you heard about today. So hopefully you have some idea of the actions you plan to take in response to what you heard this afternoon. I just want you to take a minute and think about it. Just like think about everything you learned. And if there was like one specific next step that what you heard today made you think of doing, whatever it is, even if it's somebody wanted to share the song that we were playing as we started, that could be your next step. But whatever your next step is, we're going to hold you accountable to it by putting it in the chat right now. Tell us what you're going to do, one thing that you're going to do because of what you learned today. And we'll start seeing the chat fill up with those commitments and pledges, and it will be very beautiful. I want to thank so much for our panel for joining us. I want to thank everyone with our friends at Interfaith Partners for the Chesapeake and my own team at Interfaith Power and Light. I want to thank our 20 grassroots partners, which is such a beautiful thing. And I want to thank all these friends and neighbors from across Maryland who gathered us today. We're going to close with some music for Tu B'Shvat, a Jewish ecological holiday, which begins a week from today on Sunday, February 1st at sundown. And in its original context, Tu B'Shvat was a first blossom festival that came in early spring. But for the Jewish communities like mine who celebrate Tu B'Shvat here in Maryland, the holiday comes in midwinter, long before blossoms, while the trees are completely bare. So if you are sitting near a window, notice any trees that you can see from where you're sitting right now. I can see quite a few. And they're totally barren. There's no leaves. And this is what I'm reminding myself today on the cusp of Tu B'Shvat. I am reminding myself and all of you that in frozen January, things that look dead, some of them are actually alive. More alive than we know or can see. Like just about all of the trees that all 50 some of us can see out the window right now. It's true. The sap is still rising. The roots are digging deep. They're making sugar. May we each be forces for life and for renewal, even now, even if it is happening out of sight and in midwinter. Let's be forces for life for each other, for our communities, and for Maryland, and our country, and our world as a whole. And let all of these good people say, Amen. Take good care.
Hi,